I love Indonesia. I love Indonesia for many reasons. I think people in Indonesia are always smiling.
Oh yeah,
And that's smiling is sadaqah.
sadaqah.
So a lot of sadaqah.
Charity as well, philanthropy.
Yes. So a lot of sadaqah. Indonesian people are very friendly and they're very humble. And they are very hospitable. So I think that's one thing that I love about Indonesia. I feel at home, even though I'm not Indonesian. I love batik. So, I don't like wearing ties. I don't like wearing jackets. This is perfect.
Batik is the dress for every occasions.
That's
formal,
right.
informal, you can use.
I love Indonesia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to Wonderhome Podcast. Still here with your host Muhammad Shifa Amin Wigdikdo. And today we have a wonderful friend and guest from Indiana, from the US, Dr. Shariq Siddiqui, right?
That's correct. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And Dr. Shariq is Assistant Professor of Philanthropic Studies, Director of Muslim Philanthropy Initiative in Indiana University-Indianapolis, IUI, right?
IUI.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
I studied also in Indiana.
Yes.
So we both actually share the Hoosier sentiment here, right?
We're both Hoosiers.
We are both Hoosier. Hoosier is, what do you call it? The Hoosier is...
It's a way to call people from Indiana, but nobody knows what it means.
Nobody says. So people from Indiana are called Hoosier.
Hoosiers.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Alhamdulillah. Welcome to Indonesia.
And it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Alhamdulillah. And Dr. Shariq is an expert in Islamic philanthropy studies, as I mentioned earlier. And right now he train people, right, about Islamic philanthropy, how to do fundraising, to manage the philanthropy, things like that in UMY, right, Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. So we will talk about that later. But I'm curious, Dr. Shariq, what brought you to be interested in the philanthropy work and studies? What is the background story about philanthropy of yours?
Sure. First of all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me in Indonesia, at UMY, in Jogja, and also in Wonderhome. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I come from a family that is highly professional, but very civic-minded. My father is a doctor. My grandfather was a doctor. My great-grandfather is a doctor and founded the Pakistan College of Surgeons and Physicians.
Oh,
on my
from Pakistan.
In Pakistan. On my mother's side, her father was a volunteer for Jamaat-e-Islami. He was an editor of a newspaper. Her grandfather was part of workers' parties in Pakistan. So on both sides of the family, they're very civically engaged, very social work. But the way my family did it was you spend your whole life working. You become a doctor or a doctor.
Physician,
or a doctor. This is the old school, doctor or doctor, or maybe engineer. So you did that. And then when you got to retirement, you did philanthropy. And so my parents were very civically engaged, and they always taught us that it is the responsibility of each of us to do better than the previous one. And so in my case, when I was in college and when I was in school, I was always doing volunteer work. When the floods happened in Bangladesh, I raised money there. In Zambia, when we were living there, we would volunteer with local organizations.
Oh, you used to live in Zambia as well?
I was born in England and then went to Zambia, then Saudi Arabia, then Pakistan, then England, and I moved to the United States in 1993.
Wow. All right.
So, but everywhere we went, Muslim community, Pakistani community was largely part of the volunteer committee. And so for me, there was a great opportunity to do that. So when I was in college, I was very involved with different volunteer organizations. And when I graduated from college, I wanted to help children in Indiana who were from poor families.
Okay.
And my vision was that if I can just help them graduate from high school and do 2 years of college, this is going to change the world. So then now if you want to do some good, then you do research in it, and you realize you need to raise money. And so when I looked at all the books on fundraising, they were all from Indiana University.
Press.
Indiana University Lilly Family School
Lilly
of Philanthropy.
Family of
Back then it
Philanthropy
used to be
School.
called
I
the
see.
Center on Philanthropy.
Okay.
So then I realized there is a profession.
Mm.
You don't have to become a doctor, lawyer, then become rich. You can spend your whole life doing this work.
Doing the
And so
work.
I thought, okay, why don't I do this? Why don't I spend the rest of my life in a profession that seeks to make the world a better place?
Okay. But before we talk deeper on the philanthropic work and studies, when you are in the college years, what kind of philanthropic work that you're involved in?
Yeah, so I was involved in a few different things. I was the opinion editor of the newspaper. So I would help curate news. I was involved with the International Student Association. So we used to call it the Intercultural Student Association.
Okay.
So I was involved with that. I was also involved with the Black Student Association because they were focused on civil rights and so on. And then there was a club that was focused on trying to sort of help mentorship program for children. So I would help with that. Then I also helped with students that wanted to come to the University of Indianapolis. So I would volunteer to tell them about the university and mentorship. So those were the kinds of things I did at college. But then my family, I have family in India, in Pakistan, in Africa. And so we were constantly trying to help through fundraising to help programs in those countries as well.
I see. Interesting. Also, one of my colleague who used to study in IUPUI at the time, he did anthropology, and his research is about homeless in Indianapolis. There is some concentration of homeless people.
Yes.
And he tried to understand their life, things like that, and the volunteering as well to raise some funds for the homeless. Do you also involve with the society in general, not only in the college during your college years or afterwards?
So in the college years, no, because I was an international student. I came from overseas.
International students.
Yeah, so I came to the United States for college. For me, I wasn't so involved outside of college just because it was usually through my friends and so on. And there was so much happening on my campus that I didn't. But when I graduated from college, that's when I started becoming more involved. So, for example, the mentorship program I started was at Northwest High School, which is part of the Indianapolis Public Schools. There is Second Helpings, which is food security. So I volunteered for them. And so there were many initiatives outside of campus when I graduated that were open, and I was very happy to sort of engage in those kinds of community programs.
Okay. So, after involved and engaged in those community programs, philanthropic works, when do you feel this is my thing? This is my work. This is worth pursuing a career. At the same time, you have a big, whole heart on it.
Yeah.
When do you feel about that?
So I graduated from college in May of 1996. And then I started my first nonprofit organization, which was for a mentorship program for inner city at-risk youth in Indianapolis. But I started that with the hope of doing it for a year or two and then going to get my law degree or something else. But April or May of that following year, 1 year later, I discovered three things. One, this is a profession. And I can do it. Second, I discovered 1 year is not enough to do khair. I thought when I was looking at 1 year, I thought 1 year is a long time. But at the end of 1 year, I said, it's passed. So I have so much to do. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing I realized is that my personality was born for this kind of work. I mean, I thrived in it. It's not work. It was a job, but I didn't feel like it's a job. And so at Indiana University, we have a master's degree in philanthropy. So I applied for that. And so, I started my nonprofit in May of 1996. By April of 1997, I discovered that wanted to do more of this. And in August of 1997, I started the master's degree.
Oh, you're 1997. You
Yes.
started your master degree.
Yes, in philanthropy.
In philanthropy. At the time, probably I started my degree as well in IUB.
Yeah.
Okay. I see. But then you also got JD program as well.
Yeah.
How that helps you to do for your philanthropic interest?
Sure. So I started my master's degree in philanthropy in August of 1997. In January of 1998, I reverted to Islam.
Okay.
And then in February, March of 1998, I started volunteering for the Islamic Society of North America.
Oh, ISNA.
ISNA.
Which is headquarters is in Indiana.
Is in Indiana. So this is from Laqadarullah, right? So Indiana University has the School of Philanthropy. Indiana University has ISNA. And so I started volunteering. And then a year later, I got a job at ISNA in 1999. And when I started working there, I was working on finishing my master's. And I discovered that Muslim nonprofit organizations have many challenges. And one of them is that they don't know the laws of.
I see.
So I decided I want to help nonprofit organizations in the Muslim community better understand their legal issues. But at the time, I didn't have the opportunity. So later on in 2002, I started my doctorate in jurisprudence law. And I graduated from law school in 2005. But the focus of mine was that by being a lawyer, I can help the world in three ways.
Okay.
One, I can serve as a lawyer for poor people. And I did that for victims of domestic violence, families and women, for poor people whose children were taken away. So I, through my work, would help poor people. The second thing is I can help nonprofit organizations understand law. So I helped do that. But the third thing was that the JD also provided me a credential that was seen as a mark of a leader. So if you're trying to aspire for leadership, at a time where people did not recognize philanthropy as a professional leadership degree, and now it's different. But back then, nobody even knew what philanthropy meant. So the JD gave me the credential I needed to be in a leadership role. So those are the three ways that I felt strategically that a JD will also help.
Okay. Strengthen your credentials. And your leadership in philanthropy.
Give me a focused way of helping people.
I see.
But then at the same time, Muslim nonprofits needed legal information, and I wanted to help them with that.
Yeah. Incredible. Okay, that's about you. And right now, let's talk about. We talk about, a lot about philanthropy, but sometimes people don't know what the philanthropy is actually. What do you understand, or what do you define? How do you define philanthropy in general?
Sure. So there are different definitions of philanthropy, and a popular one, I don't necessarily agree with it, but the most common one is by Robert Payton, and it's called. It means voluntary action for public good.
Voluntary action for public good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you think about this word philanthropy, this thing we call philanthropy, which is trying to do good outside of government, outside of business, it's happened for centuries. This is not something new.
Okay.
But philanthropy is a word that has been more recently, over the last 50 to 70 years, been selected to define this sector. So it's not always been there, right? Some people in history have called it charity. Right? Some people have called it social work. Some people have called it volunteer work. Some people have called it social good. So it's very recent that this has happened. And what's troubling about this word is that it's now become very popular. But its roots are very anti-religious and anti-culture.
Oh, really?
Right. So the word philanthropy comes from a play written 3 years before Christ emerged.
Before Christ.
Called Prometheus Bound.
Prometheus Bound.
Yeah, and Prometheus basically stole fire from God and gave it to human and then was punished for that. So the idea behind this is that to help people, you have to give them knowledge so that they can help. Science, fire is a form of knowledge that they can help each other. But to do that, you have to oppose God.
To oppose God.
which is a problem for most of us in the
Right.
religious world.
Right.
But for some reason, this word was selected. And so when we think about philanthropy today, there's two kinds of philanthropy.
Okay.
One is philanthropy is more scientific, more professional, it's more development oriented, and so on. And then there's another form, which is charity, which is less. This is just, how to help poor people and so on.
People, I see.
And I reject this
demarcation.
demarcation. I believe that philanthropy in an Islamic context is intention to do good or not to cause harm.
Okay.
For the
Intention to
sake
do
of-
good.
Intention to do good or not cause harm.
Not cause harm.
For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which results in khair.
What
Which
results
results
in
in
the good.
Yes.
Okay.
The good is the output. The love of
as the
God
result.
is the basis.
The foundation.
And it's not just action to do good, but it could also be inaction not to do good.
To avoid harm.
Right? And so philanthropy today is largely about rich people in developed countries. But I actually argue that an Islamic definition of philanthropy is about everybody. Everybody can do philanthropy, not just very rich people.
Not only the rich people.
Yes.
The less rich people also
Everybody.
can do good.
Yeah.
It's about intention.
Intention.
To do good or
That's
not
right.
to do
Do harm.
harm.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. But in general, the history of philanthropy, the definition of philanthropy, and the development of philanthropy is itself. For example, you mentioned earlier about in more secular and scientific way. Sometimes it's distinguished from the religious philanthropy.
That's right.
What about philanthropy in general in America? It is considered as for the development purposes or things that the charity works, this kind of thing.
I would argue it's both.
Okay.
Because in the United States, Americans are highly religious people.
Okay.
Vast majority of Americans actually are Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, and so on. And their giving, their philanthropy is really defined by their faith or inspired by their faith. So in America, even though there's an attempt to differentiate this, there isn't. Even if you were to think about majority of money in America and majority of volunteer time is all by people. And so people are inspired by religion, trade, tradition, culture, nationalism, right? All those things, family values. So in the United States, we have this, last year, Americans gave roughly $450 billion for charity.
450.
And I'm making up a few numbers, but it's like 450, 460. And of that, nearly 67% was from people.
60% from people.
Nearly 70%.
Wow.
Nearly 70%. Foundations represented 15%. People dying and leaving charities in their will was another 8 to 10%.
8 to 10%.
So in there was so still people, but these people were dying and they left will. And corporations represent only 5% of philanthropy in America. So if you think about it, the vast majority of money in the United States are people.
It's coming from people.
So people in the United States are defined by their faith.
That reminded me of, I used to live with Elinor Ostrom and Vincent Ostrom, the Nobel Prize winner at that time. And when they died, I still live in that home. And they told me, Shiva, I have wills under the refrigerator. Please give it to the lawyer after I died. And then, and the lawyer came after they died. And then all the wealth, all his possessions, his belongings go to the foundation.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
it's
incredible.
And it's not just in America. Think about Istanbul and Turkey. Think about all the waqfs. They all came from people who passed away, gave assets into a waqf. So in Islamic history, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, all across the Muslim world, you have a rich tradition where wealthy people have left, because in Muslims, 1/3 of our assets, we can do whatever we want. We can put that into a waqf. During our lifetime, we can put our assets in waqf. So Sulaiman al-Raji, for example, one of the richest men in the world, has put majority of his assets in a waqf, and he's still alive, and so this is, while it's happening in America, it happens in Islamic history all along.
As well.
But in the US, I would say individuals are the biggest drivers of giving. Philanthropy is a very common term. In fact, now philanthropy is a growing discipline. Nearly 56% of all students studying public administration are studying something to do with philanthropy or nonprofits.
Okay.
So it's a big one in every 10 Americans works for a philanthropy organization.
1
in 10.
in 10.
10% of our workforce
philanthropic
is in the
organization.
philanthropy organization.
Yeah, when I live in Bloomington, I go to YMCA. I saw in your CV you're involved in YMCA as well, which is also a philanthropic organization.
It is a philanthropy organization.
And faith-based as well.
Yeah.
Interesting. And in addition to the big philanthropists, for example, Melinda and Bill Gates,
Lilly
Foundation,
Endowment, Ford
Lilly
Foundation.
Endowment, like that you work in Lilly
Yes.
Library, right?
Yeah, Lilly Family School
Lilly
of
Family
Philanthropy.
School of Philanthropy.
Yeah, funded the Lilly family gave us money so that we could create a waqf in the school that continues to do our good work.
That is interesting. For the in the Muslim world, how come Lilly family, which is are they Muslims?
They're Episcopalian Christian.
Christian.
Yeah.
They founded an institutions to foster Islamic philanthropy. How that is possible?
So they didn't fund the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative. They funded the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy.
Okay,
the larger
Lilly
school.
Family School of Philanthropy.
And then within the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, they're wanting to have all of philanthropy grow, which means that they want Christians and Muslims, all people to go. So they didn't directly fund the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative.
Okay.
The Muslim Philanthropy Initiative is an outproduct of the larger vision they had that this sector of philanthropy should be scientifically understood. We should create a whole new generation of leaders. And they didn't say when they gave the waqf that it's only for Christians. They left it open. They said, we want to foster the building of the philanthropy discipline. And out of that, one of their outproducts of that is the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative. But it's not funded by the
Lilly family. But in the Lilly
but
family
it's a
school
child
of
of
philanthropy.
the child of the Lilly school. Family school, yes.
Child, and then later on grandchild. And
Yes, many more generations, inshallah.
All right. What is the biggest, I don't know, what is the biggest challenge for the philanthropic works in today's world? It is a big question, I know, but for example, in the age of digital age, in the age of AI, things like that, and people tend maybe to accumulate their wealth, things like that. I don't know. In the future, what is the probable or the potential challenge for the philanthropic institutions or works, activities? What do you think?
I would say there are three big challenges because I think it would be very hard to just think of one. I would think of three big challenges.
Okay.
One, overregulation.
Overregulation.
Yeah. Okay. I think there is a recognition by governments across the world that philanthropy is a great resource.
Okay.
But at the same time, government is also afraid of philanthropy because philanthropy develops civil society.
I see.
So what I worry about is that philanthropy's greatest power is that it is so organic. And governments, because their interest is to do social good, they want it to be more strategic. And what I worry is overregulation. So I think that's the number one challenge I think going forward, more so than any of the other technology. I think the second challenge that I see is professionalization.
Professionalization.
On the one side, we don't want under-professionalization of the sector. We don't want people who are just amateurs doing this work. We need professionals.
Okay.
But if it's over-professionalized, we then lose the values. So how do you create professionals that still are driven by the values of philanthropy? So I think that's the second piece. I think the third challenge, in my view, is lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge.
Across the world, there is a decline in investment in research and higher education.
And research and higher education. Okay.
But we need the opposite. If in order to solve the world's problems, we need to know what those. We need to, when we solve today's problems, we're actually solving problems that were 10 years old. The future's problems we don't even know about. So research and higher education are the best places to think about the future. What are the potential challenges of the future, and give us answers today. And so those are three challenges. I think the lack of knowledge, over professionalization or under professionalization, and over regulation.
And over regulations. Okay, let's talk about the third challenges: lack of knowledge, especially education, higher education, to research things like that. And we know in America, Alliance for Sciences, they give a lot of endowment, a lot of sciences for doing research, right? Whatever research that they will be doing. What do you think the same situation in the Muslim world so far that you know? Is there, do we have enough philanthropic fund going for research? If it is going for helping poor, building masajid, for example, that's fine. That's everywhere. But for doing research, funding people to go to the higher education, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think this is the tragedy of colonialism, right? If you think about the golden era of Islam, philanthropy was used to build madrasas. Philanthropy was used to fund ulama, scholars, was for libraries, right? So philanthropy's main purpose was to build institutions and waqfs that are much more far-reaching.
Okay.
And then colonialism came, and Muslim philanthropy changed from this very far-reaching, visionary kind of structure to base needs of feeding hunger and so on. And so today the problem is that when philanthropists are thinking about this, we're not funding anymore at the same level education or training or research. You have a few examples of this, but it's not happening. When in reality, we have so many case studies that show that when you do it, it actually makes a difference. Think about the madrasa system in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and India. Madrasa system educates people through Muslim philanthropy in madrasa system, but the people it educates would normally be poor, the poorest. And because of the madrasa system, they are taken out of subsistence, they're given food, and they're given some livelihood. Right? Even if they're Quran teachers, even if they become imam, even if they do something, so they receive some education. So we know that when you engage philanthropy in the building of higher education and knowledge and so on, it actually helps society. But for some reason, we are all focused on, let's just figure out the immediate. So philanthropy in the Islamic world, in the Muslim world, has largely become episodic. Has been reactionary because we have crisis upon crisis upon crisis. And it has been about base needs. We need to find a way in which Muslim philanthropists, not all, but many Muslim philanthropists, especially those that have great needs, they focus their resources on building this infrastructure of Waqf institution, higher education, and so on. And then maybe the grassroots, the poorer people, focus their philanthropy on base charity. And so there's this division between society where the poor still get the form. Because one of the concerns I have is if you think about zakat, zakat is one of 5 pillars of Islam.
Yes.
When you for prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said we should have prayer. We have masjids. It's an institution.
Yes.
Right? For Hajj, there's an institution. We go to Makkah and Medina. So why for zakat should there not be an institution? Especially when in one of the 8 categories of zakat is zakat collector and distributor. In fact, I would argue Islam is the first religion that has professionalized charity or zakat by making zakat collection and distribution as one of the 8 categories.
As the recipient,
And so if you are going to be a professional in this field, this requires kind of further information. So I think the idea in the Muslim community, the idea is no, zakat should not pay for anything but these things. But one of the 8 categories is the professionalization of zakat, right?
Zakat.
And that requires higher education. That requires research. That requires training. So would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not make this a priority if he didn't expect us to do these other things? So there's a disconnect between what Islam has traditionally done and potentially can do, and what Muslims are doing today. And it's one of the things that is the legacy of colonialism.
The legacy of colonialism, because we are after colonialism coming out from the crisis and falling to another crisis.
That's right.
Things like that. Okay, probably this is the final, because we have a limited time. You have to go somewhere else. Where do we start from? What steps to go? Like we mentioned earlier, we discussed earlier about the charity or the philanthropic works also need to go to increase, to enhance the education, research, higher education, so it can have a greater benefit later on, because the poor can lift up their standard of living, their social status as well through education. How and where do we start from, and what steps that we need to pave to go to that way?
Sure. So I would recommend 4 things.
Okay.
I think for those that are in our sector today, we need to provide training to them. We provide them education. So they're not going to go and do masters and PhDs, but we can provide them certifications and training. So that's one. For the future generation, we should actually educate them in master's degrees, PhD degrees in this field, so that they can create the new knowledge that we need to create. So that's the second.
Okay.
I think the third piece is that those people in this sector that are working in this sector or volunteers, let's organize them. Let's create an association where they come together, they teach each other, they learn from each other, but they also talk about what needs to happen. And then I think the final piece of it is that governments need to create incentives for people to invest their philanthropy in this sector. So maybe if you give to a higher education institution or research, it reduces your tax burden by so much. But if you give it to others, maybe it reduces it less, right? Because the infrastructure needs to be built, and government has a great ability to do that. And so my argument is that we need to find a way through all this so that we can invest in these areas. But I think if we better organize those that are involved, volunteers and employees, so that they can come together, educate each other, but actually talk about this, right? Second, train our current workers and create a new generation of workers. And then finally create the new knowledge that we need through investments and government incentives. So those are some things that I would recommend that we do. In the United States, we've taken some of these actions, right? And I don't say that everything that the US does is helpful to everybody, but it certainly is a good model, right?
Yeah,
it's the United States has done things that have professionalized this sector, and the results are pretty evident in terms of a sector that's producing new knowledge, that's producing new innovative ideas and so on. Now, I'm not saying copy and paste, but it's certainly helpful to learn what the United States is doing, and then thinking about which of those elements
suitable
for the local context.
Okay, interesting.
Just like the United States needs to look at what's happening in Indonesia and Malaysia and Pakistan, you guys are doing incredible work, and we need to learn from how you're doing it. And I think through this exchange of learnings, we're going to come up with a better world.
Okay, inshallah. Thank you very much. Last one. How long you have been in Indonesia?
Like maybe 10 days.
10 days?
A week ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. What is your impression? Things that you, your impression, your opinion about Indonesia so far after about a week you have been here?
I love Indonesia. I love Indonesia for many reasons. I think people in Indonesia are always smiling.
Oh yeah,
and that's smiling is sadaqah.
Sadaqah.
So a lot of sadaqah.
Charity as well, philanthropy.
Yes. So a lot of sadaqah. So I love that. Indonesian people are very friendly and they're very humble, and they are very hospitable. So I think that's one thing that I love about Indonesia. I feel at home, even though I'm not Indonesian.
Okay.
The second reason why I love Indonesia is I think Indonesia has figured out a way to live in harmony between culture and tradition. Like I love the idea that in the streets you'll have music,
Okay.
But then you'll go, then during Adhan time,
Adhan
people
time.
go and pray. And so there's this seamless in connection between religion and culture. And even amongst religions, right? So I think that's something that's kind of unique. How do you live in this kind of society when you have these different things? So I fell in love with that. Then I love Indonesian food. Indonesian food is amazing. Batik is great, right?
And we just ate bakso as well.
And we just had bakso, so very good food. And I like the fact that in Indonesia you do not have to wear a suit. I dislike suits, so I love batik. So I don't like wearing ties. I don't like wearing jackets. This is perfect.
Batik is the dress for every occasions.
That's
formal,
right.
informal, you can use.
I love Indonesia.
All right. Thank you very much for coming.
you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully, we can still see you next time. Next year, probably you'll come here, and
Inshallah.
then we can interact each other. Inshallah. And inshallah, we'll have collaborative work as well in terms of research, training, things like that.
Absolutely. We'll continue. This is a journey. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings people together not for coincidental
Not
reasons.
for coincidence.
He
right.
brings people together so that they get to know each other and they further the world's and make the world a better place together.
Inshallah. Amin ya rabbal alamin. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Okay, hopefully that's beneficial for all of us and we can take some lessons. Inshallah. See you again later. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih. Selamat pagi. Selamat pagi.
Yeah.